All right, in our last video, we were able to add these pretty nifty classes for correctness and incorrectness. And in this one, we're going to work on our heads up display. So what a heads up display is, if you've never heard of that term, it's basically just information about your game as you're playing. So the things that we care about in this one is things like what number question you're on. So 1 of 5, 1 of 3, things like that. And then what your score is as well. And then usually your heads up display, your HUD, kind of sits on top of your game. So it's usually at the top. So that's what we're going to do. So inside of our HTML, inside of the game here, I'm going to add an ID of HUD. Inside of that, I'll have a HUD item. It will have a p tag with a class of HUD prefix. All right. And then we'll have an H1 with a class of HUD main text. So what this is going to break down to is up here, this first HUD item, it's going to be a question. So which question are you on? And then this main text will show something like 1 of 3. And this is something we're going to have to update dynamically. And then I'm just going to copy this whole thing here. And we're going to say this one is score. And this one will start out at 3. Now we're going to need to reference these things so we can add IDs here. So not that, but ID equals score for this one. And then for the H1 above, the ID is going to be question counter. All right, so we've got those things laid out. They obviously don't look very good. So let's go ahead and style those. And I can add a little section here for not JUD, but HUD, our heads up display. And as you might expect, we're going to take our HUD and we're going to do a display flex. This is going to, by default, if I type in HUD, it'll work. So this is by default going to put things side by side horizontally, which is what we want, but we also want to space them out a little bit. So justify content is how you typically, what we've done is use this as center. That's just going to put everything in the center. But there's other options for putting spacing in between your items. So there is something called space around, which will put space. It'll take the available space and it'll divide it between here, here, and here. Otherwise, we can do space between, which will put all of the open space in between these two elements and basically push them to the outside edges. And that's what we want. So that's what we're going to do here. So we can just grab our HUD prefix and set text align center here. And that ought to line up the question and score text. Now, this text is looking really small, and I think I'm missing some P styling. So I'm just going to add font size here is going to be to rem, which is more or less 20 pixels. So that looks a little bit better, I think, here. And then also looks like I could style the HUD main text, I think is what it is, HUD main text, and just align that center as well to make sure those line up. So I think this looks pretty good for the display of the HUD. Now we need to be able to dynamically update it. So to do that, we need to get a reference in our JavaScript here to the HUD, or what's the IDs that I used here? I think it's question counter and the score. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my snippet get ID, and the first one's going to be question counter, and then the second one is get ID is not question counter but score. So notice also that we've already used those variables, so I'm going to update these to be text. So the actual text element that we're updating is going to be question counter text. The actual score element that we're going to be updating is score text. So the first thing we want to do is let's grab our HTML. Let's get rid of the 1 of 3 here. Let's just hide that for now. And so that we can do that part dynamically. So after we update our question counter, let's go and update the question counter text to reflect that. So this will be question counter text, and then we want to set the inner text, and we want to set it to two different things. Question, oh, actually this should be a variable. question counter plus a slash, and then the max questions, because we want to show them what number question they're on out of how many. So this is one way to do that. Notice that that updates appropriately. This is just using string concatenation, but there's a better way to do this with ES6 template literals, where if you use the single back quote ticks and put all of your stuff inside of that, you can reference variable names directly inside of that string. So if I use the $ and then in brackets put that variable, I can get rid of these quotes and I can just type in directly what I want while interpolating variables. So this should give us the same effect here, and it should update as I click on one of these. It should update to question 2 of 3 and 3 of 3, which is pretty cool. So in that same vein, we want to do something very similar using our score. And what we're going to do here is we're going to check whether or not the user got the answer right, and then we're going to increment the score. So I'm going to create an increment score function, which takes in a number and it increments the score as you might expect, and then it updates the score text. So score text dot enter text equals the new score. All right. So we've got this function, but now we need to call it. So what we'll do is we'll say if class to apply equals correct, then we'll call increment score, and we'll tell it to increment the score by the correct bonus. All right, so let's see what we got here when we do this. The first one should be a source. See if that increments to 10. That's good. The where do we put JavaScript? It goes to script tag. That looks good. And then I should fail this one. Actually, I just got to reload. Sorry. So let's just double check that something here doesn't increment the score. So if it doesn't equal correct, it doesn't increment the score. All right, so that looks pretty good. We're keeping track of our score. We're able to display what question we're on. Now the next thing we want to do in the next video is we're going to update this this little 2 of 3 text, 1 of 3, 2 of 3, things like that. And we want to create a progress bar to kind of show the progress to the user in a more visual way as they go through. So I think this will be a cool exercise to make this a little bit fancier. So that's what we're going to do in the next video, and I will see you there.